Now we're on Daf Chaf Amid Beis, and Rabbi Meir says that there's one parsha in the Torah that should be written with dio without kankantum, chutz mi parsha Sotah bilvad. And this parsha is written in a Sefer Torah, but the dio should be without kankantum. And here we have a discussion in the Achronim about which part of the parsha of Sotah has to be written with that dio without kankantum. And the Achronim claim that dafka osam psukim anichtov megillah Sotah, not every word and every pasuk in the parsha of Sotah is going to be written in the Megillah Sotah to be mashke the Sotah. We're going to leave out tzavos, and we're going to leave out brachos, even if it's closed mitocha brachos, etc., etc. But those words in the parsha of Sotah that will be written in Megillah Sotah, and therefore they have to be royal mechika, they will be obliterated. Those words have to be written with yo minus kankantum. Rabbi Yaakov Omer Mishmo, Rabbi Yaakov has a different tradition in the name of Rabbi Meir, chutz mi parsha Sotah shel migdash. In other words, when you write a Sefer Torah, Rabbi Meir would allow you to use kankantum. But if we have a special writing of Parsha Sotah for the purpose of a Sotah, that which is written in the Mikdash, that requires dio that lends itself to mechika, and we have to remove kankantum. My beinayu, what's the reason for this machlokes? Rav Yirmiyah limchok lo min haTorah ika beinayu. The machlokes is, can we use a parsha in a full Sefer Torah for mechika and hashkas hasotah? According to Rabbi Yehuda, you can take a parsha that's written in the Torah and you can be mochek it. And therefore you have to make sure and guarantee that when the Sefer is written, that parsha has to be suitable for hashkas sotah. And therefore, you cannot add kankantum. You have to subtract the kankantum. It's got to be royal mechika. Rabbi Yaakov, on the other hand, holds that you need lishma in ksivas Megillah Sotah. And you cannot take a parsha that's written in a Sefer Torah, which was not written lishma for the sake of this particular Sotah, and be mochik it. And therefore, you might as well write the parsha with kankantum, even though it's in a royal mechika, as opposed to a Megillah Sotah that was written lishma as a separate parsha in the Beis Hamikdash. That requires lishma and requires that we omit kankantum, so that it's royal mechika. And now the Gemara says that this issue about whether or not Megillah Sotah has to be written lishma is a machlokes tanoim. Hani tanoi ki hani tanoi. The Sanya we learned in a Brisa, a Sotah and the Megillah was written for the Sotah, and then she says Tmeani, she confesses her guilt, and she doesn't have shtia, she's ptura mi lishtos. And again, we have to assume that that we know that she is confessing her guilt, and therefore there's no suffix. Now somebody comes along and says, hey, you know what? I have a wife who's a Sotah. Can I borrow your Megillah? Says the Tanakama, Ein Megillah Saksher Lashkas Basotah Acheres. We need Lishma in the writing of a Megillah Sotah. This wasn't written Lishma, it was written for the first Sotah, not for the second. But the Brisa records the dissenting view of Rabbi Achai Bar Oshia Shomer, Megillah Saksher Lashkas Basotah Acheres. You don't require Lishma in the writing of a Megillah. And therefore, even though this Megillah was written for Rachel, it can be used for Leah. That's the sheet of Rabbi Achai. And the Gemara thinks that the issue about writing a Sefer Torah when you get to the parsha of Sotah, whether or not you have to be makpid to omit kankantum so that it's roy lashkas Sotah or not, that depends upon whether you can use the Sefer Torah and the Parsha of Sotah therein for Ashkas Sotah, depends upon whether Lishma or not. That's a machlokas between the Tanna Kama and Rabbi Acha. Amar Papa Dilma Lohi. And we're going to soon see that Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak Dilma Lohi. And Rav Papa and Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak are going to say two sides of a coin. Rav Papa is going to say that Ad Kan Lo Kama Tanna Kama Hasam. When did the Tanna Kama say that if a Megillah was written for Rachel, Sotah Aleph, it cannot be used for Leah, Sotah Beis? Elakeva de intak l'shum Rachel lo hajimino l'shum Leah. Since it was written specifically for Rachel, it now has the status of a Megillah Sotah for Rachel to the exclusion of anyone else. Avol Torah, when you write a Sefer Torah, the stama, Siva, it's written stama. It wasn't written for any specific woman, and stam means that we could use it for any Sotah. So a Sefer Torah could be used for any Sotah. So even though the Tanna Kama requires lishma, that's only in the negative sense, that if it was shalol lishma, but rather it was nituk for isha cheres, that it can't be used. But if it's stama and there was no lishma at all, then you could use it as a Megillah Sotah. So that's all Rav Papa in explaining the Tanna Kama. Now we're going to get to Rav Nachman explaining Rav Achai. Dilma Loi Ad Kan Lo Kama Rav Achai Bar Oshia. So when did Rav Achai insist that if the Megillah was written for the sake of one woman, you could use it for another woman? That's Ela b'Megillah. The Ichtov L'Shum Olos Ba'olam. At least the Megillah had a kavana, a ksiva l'shem olos. Avol Torah dil Islamed ksiva, but Torah is written to read and study. It's not written for klala. It's hachinami delo machkinon. Rav Achai would agree that you cannot use it for mechika of Hashkas Sotah because there's no element of L'Shem Olos. Now the Gemara is going to raise a contradiction between a Mishnah in Gittin on Daf Chav Daled and the Shita of Rabbi Chai with regard to using a Megillah Sotah that was written for Sotah Rachel, using it for Leah, which according to Rachai, since it was written l'shem Allah, you can do. Kasav legarshis ishto ben nimlach, umatzo ben irov yamalo shmi kishimcha b'shem ishtik sheyushcha. So the first Baal decides he's not going to give the get, and another Baal who has the same name, he and his wife have the same name as the first Baal, and they're from the same city, he asks him, hey, you know what? Why throw out the get? Save me the hassle and the expense of writing another get. Give me that get. Also, garishbo. Why? Because since a get has to be written lishma, because of la sefer krisus, la lishma, and here it was written for the first Rachel and not for the second Rachel, therefore it's possible. So why does our Achai machshir a Megillah Sotah that is written for Rachel, and he allows Leah to use the same Megillah Sotah? I'm reading more. It says, Hasav v'kasav la amar Achmana, be'inon ksiva l'shma. The Torah adds the word la to teach us that the writing of the get has to be l'shma, for that woman. But Hacha, here in Sotah, it says v'asa la. It doesn't say v'kasav la. We need an asiyah to be lishma. And that asiyah is not at all connected to ksiva. Ksiva is only like a hechsher, a prologue. But my asiyah mechika, right? The ultimate asiyah in the Parsha of Sotah is going to be mechika. Now, the reason why Asiya is interpreted as Mechika is because, as far as Mechikas Hashem is concerned, the Torah says Lo Tasun Ken. So the word Asiya appears in the Parsha Mechika. But you cannot use, even according to Rav Achai, a Megillah Sotah that was not written l'shem Allah. For example, if it's a parsha in the Torah, for Hashkas, Sotah, and Mechikas Hashem. So we definitely need a Ksiva l'shem Allah. The Mishnah says, "Ein maspekes l'shtos ad shepaneh mani Rabbi Shimon idiyoma makaris min chasa v'achar kach mashka." So it means that the mincha was already brought, because if the mincha hasn't been brought yet, then she wouldn't have this immediate, impact. So the mincha comes to be mavar the avon. So the mayim are only bodek after the aktaras mincha. According to the Rabbanon, the ashka comes before the aktara. And therefore, the mayim will only be effective after the aktar, so there's no way that she would begin a process of dying immediately. The Gemara says, wait a minute, Ema Seifa. Yesh l'schus ha'isatolula, asan l'rabbanon. Di Rabbi Shimon ha'amar. The Mishnah later on in Daf Chav Beis quotes Rabbi Shimon as saying, Ein schus tola b'mayim amarim. So we have a stira in terms of who's the Tana of the Mishnah. It can't be the Chachamim, it can't be Rabbi Shimon. Rav Chisda Amani Rabbi Akiva. The author of the Mishnah is none other than Rabbi Akiva the Omar. On the one hand, he holds like Rabbi Shimon that Makravis Minchas v'Akach Mashke. However, we already have clarified, and that we already clarified. But as far as Chus is concerned, Savalak Rabbanon, Rabbi Akiva is on the team of the Rabbanon against Rabbi Shimon and holds that this is Chus Tola. The Mishnah says, "Hey, Omrim Hotziua, my time, but why do we have to get her out of the Azara? Dilma Mesa, she'll die, and there'll be tum in the Azara. Lememer de Mesa also b'machna levia." Wait a second, she's not inside the Azara; she's outside the Azara in the machna levia, which is the Harabayis, and there's no din that prohibits a corpse from entering into the Arabayas. But Tanya, as we learned in the Brisa, not only is someone who contracted Tumas Mes permitted to enter into the Machna Levia, meaning anywhere in the Arabayas, unless it was sanctified with Kedushas Hazara, Lo Tami Mes Bilvad Omer Lafilu Mes Atzmo. We're going to prove from Moshe and the bones of Yosef that you're allowed to enter into the Harabais of your tummy, and not only that, you're allowed to bring a dead body into the Harabais. And the Kedushas Hazara, which is called Machne Shechina, is otherwise known as the Ezras Yisrael, and from that point on, there's no tumah allowed, no tumas mess, and it's certainly not a mess. But as far as the Shar Nikadar is concerned, which is not the Ezras Yisrael, but the Ezras Noshim, and that's exactly where the Sotah was situated, that Ezras Noshim and Shar Nikadar has the status of Harabayas. Hutru Tmei Mason Likonis L'Sochad, even Mesa Atzma. Shenema, where do we see that a mess Atzmo is mutter? Vayikach Moshe Atzmos Yosef Imo. Imo b'mechitzaso b'machna levia. Amar Abaye Shema Tifros Nid. We're not worried about her death, but rather we're worried that she may be so overwhelmed by the fear of drinking that it'll change her inner biological clock and she will become a Nida. And a Nida is not allowed to enter into the Machna Levia. L'meimer to be Susa Marape, according to Abaye.
Good morning, Rabbi Rhodes. I have a little girl here. Little baby. Whoops. This is Devorah, named after my mother. Newborn. Baruch Hashem. Okay, sorry I interrupted.
No, it's a
I'm
pleasure.
going to share the simcha.
Now, what does the word marpia mean? Marpia means it sort of loosens up something. So the dam of Nida comes out of the makar, and usually it's closed at that point in time. She doesn't have a veses at that point. But as a result of her pachad, Abai seems to insist that her body kind of gets a little soft, and there's a little opening in the makar, and therefore the dam will come down. And the Gemara says, and I'll prove it to you. Abai is going to prove it. Tichsiv, by Esther, it says that when she found out about Mordechai and the destruction, the Gzera of Haman, Vatischalchel amalcha ma'od, v'yom Rav, what does it mean, Vatischalchel, shepirsa nida? And the Rasha explains that what led the Chachamim, Rav, to assume that Vatischalchel means that person nida. And he says that the word Vatischalchel is miloshen chalolim. Chalolim means that, those openings in a woman's body became nismasmasu. They became sort of soft, and therefore a person nida. So, frek the Gemara of Hanantanan, charodom esalekes domin. Just the opposite. That if a woman is in a veses where she should see dam, and therefore if she fails to check herself, we assume she's tmeah. But what happens if afterwards she checks herself and there's no dam there? So we'll still assume that she saw a dam and somehow she didn't find the dam. But if at that period of time she is hiding because of listim, this is something appropriate to Yom HaShoah, right? Or let's say the city is completely surrounded by the enemies, and they're about to, transport everyone to the camps. So now, even though she checked herself after and she did not find dam, even though she passed the time when she should have seen dam, which normally means that even if she doesn't find dam in a b'tika, she's tmeah, here she's tahora. Why? Because charada, fear, misalekes es adam. So Gemara, now the whole psychiatric piece of Gemara here, psychological analysis. Hachta tzomis bi usa marapia. There's something called pachad, and what that means is that you're in an ongoing state of fear. It's not something that suddenly fell upon you. Tzomis means it tightens. Whereas b'yisusa, if all of a sudden something happens, hesa pisom, and she's in a state of charada, like Sotah, that until now she wasn't afraid, but now, she's about to die and she drinks, then at that point when she's about to die, that's called marpia. That already softens her up. And Esther all of a sudden found out about this gzera. So she was in a state of marpia. And that's going to bring to an opening of the makar and to dam nida. The Mishnah says, Yeshel Sklus Hoysa, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, Mani Masnisin, lo Abba Yossi, lo Rabbi Lezer, lo Rabbi Yishmael. Why? Desanya, what's the maximum amount of Sklus Tola? Is according to the Tanakama, which is Abba Yossi ben Hanan, it's up to 3 months. Kidei Akora Sa'ubar. According to Rabbi Eliezer ben Yitzchak, it's Tisha Chadashim, the amount of months it takes for her to give birth. V'niksa, shenemar niksa v'nizra'a, Zara. That the schus is told off up to 9 months. Well, halonomer Zara yavdenu yisupar pasuk tilim Sarah royalist saper. So that means up to 9 months. Rabbi Shmuel Omer Shnei Masar Chodesh, up to 12 months. And he derives it from a pasuk Afishein Raya l'davar. There's no explicit proof for this, but zeich l'davar, there's at least a zeich l'davar. The chsiv, when Daniel, and he was punished for this, but he interpreted a dream of Nebuchadnezzar, gave him an eitzah, how to avoid the fulfillment of that dream. In the dream, Nebuchadnezzar, the king, was sent away from human centers into a place where there were chayas and behemos, and Daniel gave him an eitzah how to survive this gezerah and avoid this gezerah. And he says to him, all right, we'll read the Aramaic and then we'll translate Lahan Malka, Milki Yishpach Alayach, Vechatach Bitzdaka Pura. Staka, that's the key word here. Ve'avayasa b'machan onin. Hein, here on Chaf Al, Hein teheva archa lishlavsa. So it means like this: you are the king, but listen to my recommendation. And if it finds favor in your eyes and you believe it and rely on it, then you will be pode your chet b'tzedakah, and your avon will be removed. Why? Because you'll have a compassion on the poor people. As a result of the fact that Nebuchadnezzar sent the Jews into Golus, there were many poor, destitute people who were re'evim, and they were so poor they didn't have food to eat. They were dying of hunger. So if you'll do this, says Daniel, and you'll feed the poor people, then lo tov alecha paronius. And as a result, Nebuchadnezzar would gather together the Aniyah Yisrael on a daily basis, and he would supply all their mazonos. He was mefarnes them, and he survived. Uksiv, and in the pasuk of Daniel it says Kola Mota al Nebuchadnezzar Malka. The entire interpretation of this dream was received by Nebuchadnezzar. Uksiv l'ktsas Yarchin Treasar. That at the end of 12 months, that's when the perennials befell Nebuchadnezzar. So we see that the schus of the Sinat Staka protected him for up to 12 months. And the Gemara understands that according to Rabbi Shmuel, that's the maximum time of schus. So our Mishnah that says 1 year, 2 years, 3 years is against all three Tanoim. The Gemara answers Liolam, Rabbi Shmuel. Rabbi Shmuel didn't mean to say that the ceiling, the maximum amount of time of schus is 12 months. Ashka kradi Omar Vitani, since he found this pasuk in Daniel, he mentioned 12 months. But it could be that there'd be a harachas azman, that a Akash Baruch Hu would extend that time period, another year and even a third year. Tichsiv, as we see in Amos, Kamar Hashem al shlosha pishei adam. So therefore, you have 12 months of schus toleh, and if Akash Baruch Hu will extend it, it could be extended 3 times. Al shlosha pishei adam. Umay afal pishein raya l'dover zeichel l'dover. Why is it not a raya from Nebuchadnezzar? Dilma shiny over kocham dilo mifkid dina layu. Perhaps it's different by goyim. We can't prove anything from goyim because HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants to save their peronius for the next world, and therefore he doesn't rush to punish them in this world. But with regard to Yisrael, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is more medagdek and he's more memayer. He wants to, he with the capital H wants to punish them in this world, and therefore the fact that Nebuchadnezzar had his chus, that's not a raya gemura to prove anything as far as a Yisrael is. And this is where we're going to stop for today. Right here in Yesh Schus Tole Shlosha Yom. Okay, then, so that's for tomorrow, Yom Revi'i. Okay, I wish you a great day.